Hello and welcome to tonight's lecture, arranged by the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm your host, Naeem Mahmood. Tonight, we are to have the first lecture of the three-part series with the title, East Asian Islamic, Present, Past, and Future. The aim of the series is to understand the presence of Islam in Japan and in East Asian countries. So before we start, let me give you a brief intro about the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. The Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, CAMES in short, is a non-partisan organization based in London, promoting activities to understand Asia and the Middle East better, and acts as a hub for engaging with region's arts, culture, and politics. We engage through research and dialogue to facilitate a better understanding of these regions from socio-economic and political viewpoints. Recently, we have undertaken several lecture series on terrorism, colonialism, Ottoman Empire, civilizational studies, and the influence of modernity on the Islamic head. Tonight, we are to have the 7th lecture series. The title of tonight's lecture is Muslims Scholar in Japan, Contemplating Islam in a Non-Muslim Society. The lecturer is Dr. Naoki Yamamoto. Dr. Naoki is currently an assistant professor at Graduate School of Turkic Studies, Marmara University, Turkey. He completed his PhD at Graduate School of Asia and African Studies, Kyoto University, Japan. He specializes in Ottoman Tasawwuf and traditional Japanese culture. His publications include a Japanese translation of Sulaimi's Kitab al-Futwa and Introduction to Tasawwuf, a comparison with Shonen manga. So that is a brief intro of tonight's lecture. The lecture is next, which will last around 30 to 45 minutes. And then the lecture will be followed by comments and Q&A section, which will last around 30 to 45 minutes as well. We observe few rules. We ask our audience to keep the mic and mobile muted until told otherwise. We encourage our audience to have questions and discussions maintaining professional approach. We also encourage attendees to take notes on the lecture for the comments and Q&A section. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Naoki to deliver the lecture. Naoki, over to you. And if you have a presentation, please go ahead for the presentation. Then I'll use the first slide as well for the meantime.
Oh, thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes, go ahead now, thank you. You should be fine. And let me start my sharing as well.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, that's fine. It's coming up nicely.
Okay. So, well, I didn't think. Then, Assalamu alaikum. Then I would like to start my presentation. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me such a wonderful opportunity. And as the as the brother Naim introduced me, my name is Naoki Yamamoto. I am Naoki Yamamoto. And currently I'm working at the Marmara University as assistant professor. And today, actually not for today, as a series for this comments lecture, I would like to talk about the Islam and Islamic culture and tradition in East Asia. But especially I would like to focus on Islam in Japan. And when I say the Islam in Japan, I think I suspect most of I think most of the people don't know much about Islamic history in East Asia. But East Asia itself is really interesting region because for example, that one, this one is one of the oldest masjid in China. And it is said that, it was built in 7th century, either 7th century or 8th century. This is one of the oldest masjid. And the right one, this one, is the Kobe Masjid, which is built by the foreign Muslim during the 20th century. And mostly supported by the South Asian Muslim. So that's why, the architecture still keep the South Asian flavor in it. And And Japan is considered Japan has the, how can I say, the youngest Muslim community, in the history, like of Islam. So in East Asia, East Asia has the both oldest Islamic tradition, which is established by non-Arab, and also like a country, Japan, has the youngest Muslim community, which sometimes you can never even a community. This is a really early period. So so the old tradition and the new trends are live together. If we see that region as the East Asia, but however, it's quite unfortunate that for example, now I'm using the word East Asia. But the few of us means Japanese or Korean or Chinese or Vietnamese or Taiwanese, few of us has identity as East Asian, and it's also including East Asian Muslim as well. When we try to identify ourselves, for example, I'm the Japanese saying that I'm Japanese, that instead of East Asian, and Chinese are Chinese, and Koreans are Koreans, and Vietnamese are Vietnamese. This is all because the establishment of the nation state, and in the other classes as well, I'm always emphasizing that this is just a constructed a social reality, which means once we Japanese and Korean and Chinese, which Chinese were in the same civilization, it's called a Chinese civilization, and including Vietnam and other regions as well. Because for example, Japanese, we are using a Chinese character, and Korean were also using that before they inventing their own Korean characters, and Chinese also still keep the Chinese characters. So sometimes the academician call East Asian civilization as a Chinese character civilization, like Hanzu civilization. But because of this established nation state, our identity was something scattered, and even including Muslim, the people who supposed to have one shared identity in the ummah, we cannot work together in a proper way. So I think, and also in the field of area study as well in Japan, we always try to divide region, divide the region, like Islam in Japan and Islam in Korea and Islam in China and Islam in Vietnam and so on. But I think for to make the world better, I think what is important for us is that even when we're trying to study about Islam in East Asia, it's important for us how we can reconstruct, our identity and try to use this heritage or the culture or the people who are living right now, or to help with those people who are living right now in East Asia to create one shared identity. And today, and the contents of the series is as follows. The first, I would focus on the Muslim scholar in Japan, and the second, this is more my related to my current project. I would like to talk that how we can I would like to talk the possibility of creating a Japanese Islamic culture in the future, and the third one is that in order to expand our perspective, I would like to talk about the a cultural or intellectual heritage of the Muslim live in the East Asia. And the reason why I chose, the Japanese Muslim scholar in Japan for today's topic is that there are so many researches. Actually, there are some researches about the Islam in Japan, but most of the studies focus on Islam during Japanese Muslim during the Meiji period. The Meiji period is from the 20th century until the and the 20th century, the age of modernization. But today I don't have enough time, so I will briefly talk about it. But there is actually a huge gap between the Japanese Muslim in the Meiji period and Japanese Muslim who live in the 21st period, because Japanese Muslim in the 20th century in the age of a Meiji period after the end of Second World War, those Japanese Muslims were created by the colonial policy of the Japanese government in most of the cases. So some of the academicians, they claim that those Japanese Muslims are actually fake. They call bogus Muslim, who try to and they try to send those Japanese to the Muslim countries, like in like South Asia or the China's or the other region. They try to collect that information about the Muslim, to help the Japanese Empire to colonize those places. And so, and there are some like Japanese Muslim who left like diaries or like articles or inquiries, about the Islam. But we must not forget that, we have to really careful about analyzing like their text, because in the end, like Allah Alam, only Allah knows that those Japanese Muslims are not, if they are like Muslims or not. But as like a Japanese Muslim, what is important that we must not make like a same mistake. Here, mistakes mean like being used by some kind of like power, like authority. Most of the cases, like like a government, and my aim is to try to like reconstruct the Japanese Muslim identity so that we can be like a part of the Ummah in a global sense, and in order to achieve this goal, for example, I have been Muslim for like 13 years, but I will explain later. But what I have seen in Japan is actually the miraculous development of the Islamic scholarship, which is done by the Japanese Muslim scholars who live in the 20th century. So today, and also those efforts were not fully recognized or introduced to like Muslim audiences like outside Japan. So today aim is mostly that I want to introduce those like Japanese Muslim like scholars who are living in the contemporary Japan, who are very sincere in like contemplating Islam in like a non-Muslim country in Japan. And if anyone is interested about history of Islam and also like current situation of Muslim in Japan, and if you know Japanese, I recommend this book written by the Professor Komura Akiko, で、日本とイスラムが出会うとき、その歴史と可能性 means like when Japanese meet Japan, its history and a prospect. I found this book is more like I think balanced and very informative book. But unfortunately, there is no like English translation or and also any like English resources, which is the qualities are current to this book. So if there is like any publisher who is interested, like translating this book, I'm very willing to help you. So please contact me after the presentation.
Naoki, could you make the full screen the presentation, please?
Excuse me?
Could you make it full screen? You think?
Full?
The slides. Can you make the slides
okay.
full screen? Thank you.
表示こうかな
Yeah, much better.
Wait. I will do it again. Can you see?
Yeah, go ahead.
So before introducing the Japanese scholars, I would like to talk about like general picture of the Muslim in Japan. For example, it says that the approximately around 200,000 Muslims are living in Japan right now, but most of them are like the Muslim foreigners who came for Japan for like a short time. And the majority is like Bangladesh Muslims and Pakistani Muslim and Indonesian Muslim, like Muslim from like South Asia and Southeast Asia. And it's very unfortunate that there is no accurate statistic on the number of Japanese Muslim, like but it says around, it's not accurate statistic at all, but it says that 50,000 to like 100,000. Japanese Muslim are now available, and most of these Japanese Muslim are the ones who become Muslim through marriage with the Muslim foreigners like living in Japan. And I think the Muslim converts, I think the male, and so it means like most of the Muslim converts are like, and also most of the Muslim converts are female. And I think male Muslim converts is really rare. Maybe it's less than like 1,000 possibility. And in addition to that, we also have like a second and third generation Muslim. It means like in the Muslim who has the like parents who have the origin from like Pakistan or Bangladesh or Indonesian, and they are also quite active right now in the masajid or like Islamic culture center in Japan. So I hope they are. I see a lot of potential in the actually the second and third generation, like young Japanese Muslim as well. So, yes, and we also have the institute called Association for Japanese Muslim. This association is not that big, but is working to help the Japanese Muslim converts in Japan. And the people who are running this institute are mainly the Japanese Muslims who study in the Azhar University or the university in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabian the government are also like helping the Association for Japanese Muslim as well. So today, as I said, the reason why I want to introduce those Japanese Muslim intellectuals is means that they are not fully like introduced to the Muslim audiences. And for example, now I'm in Istanbul, and many of my friends always ask me the same question that why I say that what is the situation like Muslim in Japan, and also like what, and they have the image that that the most of the Japanese like reject like Islam, and they always see see the Islam or the Muslim as like an alien, and like there is no hope that Islam grows in the land of non-Muslim countries. And to some extent, like I think it's correct. Because like we Japanese Muslims are super minorities. For example, like even the Christian in Japan is like just 1% of the population in Japan. And when it comes to the Muslim, it's like 0.001%. And the Japanese Muslim convert is like 0.0001% of the whole population in Japan. So there is a fact that we are super minorities, but also in the same time, we must not forget that Japan and Muslim world, interaction between Japan and Muslim world began 150 years ago. That it means like our history is relatively new, as it is quite new. And if you look about the history of the Islamization in one particular region, usually like it takes like 400 years for that region to accept Islam, and the majority of the citizens to become Muslims. Like the after the land has entered the Islamic ruling system, like it become like the part of the Islamic empire, or the king become like a Muslim and started rule around according to the Sharia. And Japan is still like a non-Muslim country, and the history is also relatively new. So it means like we are just our history had just started, and even this is like a first stage of like Islamization. It's not even like the stage of Islamization. It means like it's the very first stage that some of the Japanese Muslims started to accept like like Islamic value. And also when we look about the process of the Islamic like vernaculization of Islam, the first phase is called like identification, and the second phase is called translation, and the third phase is called articulation. And the first phase, identification, it means like in this generation, they just acquire just identity as Muslim, and they may start to practice, practice Islam, but they don't have like quite literacy about like Islamic classics or like classical Arabic grammar or like ilm al-kalam or fiqh or tasawwuf. Like this is too much for them. So what they can do is just try to embrace Islam and try and acquire like a Muslim identity. And usually after 100 years or 200 years, those Muslim communities start to translate those Islamic classics to study more about like like Islamic values. And this is the second generation. For example, like in the phase of China, at first they only like a Muslim elite were able to read like Arabic or the Persian text. But those people traveled to like Arab regions or like Central Asia, and they brought back the Islamic classics, and they started to translate the Islamic classic into their vernacular language. In the case of China, it's like Chinese language. And Japan, and when it comes to Japan, I think now at last the second phase has just started. Translating like a Quran or translating like a Hadith and translating some of the Islamic classic, which were like widely read by the Muslim students. Yeah, so, and I think now in the so I think yes, and when this second phase, translation has fully accomplished, then we can move to the third phase called articulation. Articulation is now acquiring the ability or like intellectual ability to articulate the Islamic values or the concept in the vernacular language. So like many people, I think, some of the Muslim like preachers or even the scholar, they know how to say importance of the pacing. Pacing it means like you cannot bring everything from your own country to Japan and try to spread the word of Islam. And there is really famous hadith like tuhaddis an-nas ala qadri uqulihim. Like tuhaddis an-nas ala qadri uqulihim. It means talk to the people according to the level of aql, the reason. But here it means like talk to the people according to their own context. And in Japan, even just translating Quran is not enough because this is just like a translation. What is important is try to spend time with the one who embodies the message of Quran or Hadith, or try to build a community, which can be the manifestation of like a Quranic ideals or the values. And also, and furthermore, that in order to overcome like a narrow like a nation state mindset among like the non-Muslim Japanese, like they need to get more exposed to like a broader like a Muslim community, like a Malaysian Muslim or Indonesian Muslim or like Turkish Muslim or the Pakistani Muslim. So what I want to say is that they are the stage, and we need to like respect those like processes. And now, as I said, now the Japanese Muslim community is now in the second phase, and I think some of them are now reaching to the stage of articulation. But what I always want to emphasize, like repeatedly, is that we need to we need to wait and we need to cherish these processes. And maybe, inshallah, I don't know, maybe in the 1,000 years or like 2,000 years later, maybe like a Japanese Ghazali might appear. But we must not like haste like the speed of accept the Islamization. And about like Islamic scholarship like in Japan, as I said, there are some like Japanese Muslim in prior period or during the Second World War, but most of the Japanese Muslim were like educated. And also they're created by the Japanese like colonial policies. So it's really difficult to identify that if they are really like sincere like Muslims or not. But at least, but as far as like the like works or inquiries which are left by written by the Japanese Muslim, there are some like Hachi records or like a travelogue of Middle East and China, and also one Japanese Muslim called Tanaka Ippei. He wrote the Japanese translation of the Chinese Muslim scholars like Yuzi's, like a Sirat Nabawiya. And also not only Tanaka Ippei, but other like Japanese Muslims who work for the Japanese Empire, they wrote some of the article which talk about the affinity of the Japanese nationalism or the Shintoism with the Islam. But I also read most of their work, but I found their works are really problematic. Here, what I meant by problematic is that, for example, they talk about, some of the Japanese Muslims talk that respecting the Japanese Empire will never conflict with like respecting of Allah, and he tried to explain like theological argument that how the Japanese nationalism or imperialism can coexist with the Japanese values. But I don't think that kind of argument is like valid anymore. I think this is really like really context oriented, or maybe like a political oriented. So we like Japanese Muslims, since our history is so new, like some of the Japanese Muslim try to, how can I say, in order to show ourselves like big, we try to like emphasize our history that, we have like, we have the continued tradition for the major tradition, major period until the present. But I don't think this is like historical correct, because even historically after the Second World War, those Japanese Muslims have suddenly disappeared. Because the Japanese Empire cut the support to those Japanese Muslim activists in China or the other, or the Malays or in this region. And also, and they might, and among like non-Muslim Japanese audiences, they are not like famous at all, or they are not even popular at all. For example, like, and when comparing to like Japanese Christian intellectuals or like Japanese like essayist like activists. For example, there is a very famous like Japanese Christian intellectual called Nitobe Inazo, who is the author of the book of like Bushido, philosophy of samurai. Like when we compare the, let's say, the contribution of the Japanese Christian intellectual and the Japanese Muslim like intellectual during this, the 20th century, I think those Japanese Muslim, they only left like what they did is mostly based on like political interest, and there is no like how can I say, and it's really difficult to gain some like a philosophical or like ethical message from their work. For example, like Nitobe Inazo's work, like, this philosophy of Bushido, even before accepting Islam, I got really influenced by his book and the other Japanese Muslim, Japanese Christian as well, because they have like a clear vision. This vision means like in those Japanese Christian, they are really sincere with like making like Japanese society to the like better. And also they are quite influential as well. So what I believe is that we Japanese Muslim in the 20th century, actually we can also learn from the other like Japanese intellectual as well, like, in order to expand our perspective. And right now, we have a translation of the Quran, and we have a translation of Hadith, so called like Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, and we have like more than hundreds or maybe 1,000 like of like introductory books on Islam, like what is the concept of Allah, what is the concept of like prophethood, and what is the meaning of like ibadah and so on. And some of the Japanese Muslim like professors or intellectual, they have also started to translate like the Islamic Aqidah or the Kalam, like classic books, and the fiqh and tasawwuf as well. And in terms of fiqh, I think many Japanese Muslims are like Shafi mazhab because of the support of the Indonesian Muslims. And the people like me, for example, I have studied in Turkey, so that my mazhab is like a Hanafi. But I think Hanafi is a relatively minority in the Muslim community in Japan. And there is also like some of the translations, the classics of the Tasawwuf as well. And if you look about the Japanese Muslim intellectual, we can see like various like educational backgrounds. For example, like the Sheikh Said Sato, he is currently working at the Association of the Japanese Muslim, and also I think he is also working at the Arab Islamic Culture Center, which is affiliated to the Saudi Arabia embassy. He got education in Mauritania and also Saudi Arabia, and he has also translated, the Quran to the Japanese. And the next one, he's working at the Iranian embassy. His name is the Sheikh Ibrahim Sawada. He is the Iranian. He got his education in Iran, and he is like Shi'i, like a Japanese Muslim, like Shi'i Japanese Muslim. I think, and they are recruiting lots of like Japanese Muslim to the international university, Al Mustafa International University. I heard it's in Iran. And what is really interesting is that this Al Mustafa International University, they never include like a non-Muslim Japanese. They always target like a Muslim Japanese convert, and they give like full scholarship to study in Iran. And usually when they come back, those Sunni Japanese converts become like a Shia Japanese convert. So it means like I think they have the clear strategy on this. And and the Sheikh Ebirami Sawada, he also translated the Quran to the Japanese. And this is not the person, this is the institution, but this is Tokyo Jami, and now it's run by the Diyanet, religious embassy of the Turkey. And now Tokyo Jami is one of the most popular like a touristic place in Tokyo as well. And they are doing a lot of like attractive cultural activities. And also they are giving like a Quran or Islamic courses. And they also have the Japanese translation of the Quran. And what I want to say is that, and actually I want to ask the audiences, but don't you see this is really confusing? Because Iranian embassy and Saudi embassies and the Tokyo Jami, they publish their own Japanese translation of the Quran. And if you have if you have a literacy, maybe you can just pick one Indian. I mean, if you can read the Arabic, you don't have to read the Japanese translation. But think about like a non-Muslim like a Japanese who might get interested in like studying Islam, and when he searches on the Google, he or she will find like 3 versions of Japanese translation of Quran. But one is supported by Saudis, one is supported by Iran, and one is by like Turkey. And not only like translation of Quran, like I often see this kind of like, how can I say, like ideological conflicts, between like a nation state, between like Turkey and Iran and Saudi, and also like other again Muslim movement as well. Like activities like Jamaat Islami or Tablighi Jamaats. So when I have the conversation with the Muslim foreigners living in Japan, sometimes I ask like, sometimes, for example, they say that, they want to introduce Islam to the Japanese, but I always say that, they're introducing Islam for whom? Like, are they really trying to introduce Islam for like Japanese audiences, or are they just introduce Islam for their own sake? It means like to prove that their version of understanding Islam is correct. And also, like receiving foreign aid can get you involved in an ideological war, which for example, I've been Muslim for 13 years, but I see this kind of conflict like every year or something every month. And actually, this is not the problem of the problem comes from outside. I think this is problem like within us. What us means like Japanese Muslim, because we don't have like, we have not yet established our like independency as a Japanese Muslim. And there are so many who like Japanese Muslim who see the values on investing in education and also investing on like seeking the ilm. So that's why like that's why it makes us like vulnerable and also like dependent on like a foreign aid. And usually, this foreign aid has a strength. So that's why, sometimes, some of the Japanese Muslim, they become like the puppets of the like a political interest. Even without knowing it. But here, I must emphasize, I'm not judging, for example, like those kind of activities. That, for example, those 3 versions of the Quran, I read all of them, and all of them really quite work. So, and I think even the non-Muslim Japanese can get a lot of benefit from this. But what I want to say is that I'm talking to myself actually. Like we always have to be like sensitive on like relying on others who might have like their political interest. And what is more important for us to establish our own like identity or the independency. But and also, we always try, and we should, I think, convince, our Muslim brothers and sisters in Japan, this Japanese Muslim convert, the importance of like investing in education, especially for the next generation of the Japanese Muslim. And when it comes to education, I would like to introduce another good Muslim brother who is working in Japan. His name is the Sheikh Ahmad Maeda. He got graduated from the University of the Fatah Islami, I think Jamia Fatah Islami in Syria. He got a traditional education there, and what I respect him most is that he focused on like a child education, child education. So he organized like in the Sunday class, and also he also teach like a tajweed class for the children, and especially the children in the second generation and the third generation. And he also organized like lots of like the open courses for like a non-Muslim like audience, non-Muslim Japanese audiences in the universities. And so comparing to the like a Japanese Muslim image period, like it's clear that this Sheikh Ahmad Miner has a vision. This vision means like he understand the importance of investing on the like a young generation. And the other and another scholar I would like to introduce is this Hassan Nagatako. Like if you Google his name, you might see like some of the scary picture of him. And actually there is a reason that he has a PhD in Cairo University, and his specialty is Ibn Taymiyyah, like a political thought. And he worked as a professor at Yamaguchi University and the Doshichi University. For example, Doshichi University is one of the most famous universities in Kyoto, the ex-capital in Japan. And I think everybody knows the incident of the ISIS, establishment of ISIS. I think it's more than 5 years ago, I think. And since his major is the Ibn Taymiyyah's political thought, one journalist made an interview with him, and he just answered according to what Ibn Taymiyyah said. And I think that journalist, he didn't have like enough literacy to understand what he said. So I think he misunderstood that he's supporting ISIS or something. And the whole media become a little bit panicked and try to demonize him. And at that time, and actually he is my teacher as well. So we face a lot of challenges at that time. I think people who live in European countries or America, you might face the kind of like Islamophobic experiences as well. Like sometimes things gonna be too crazy, and the people try to demonize us like suddenly. And I also face the similar thing, when it comes to the challenges that Professor Hassan also faced. But he is a really sincere. He's a really sincere Muslim, and not just being sincere Muslim, that he really loves the students a lot. Like the most of the leading Japanese Muslim intellectual who live in Japan is actually the student of Professor Hassan. So he is like, and I think he is the most important Japanese Muslim scholar to understand, I think, the history of Islam in Japan. Like this is undoubtable. And he also translated with the Quran, the Japanese. He also translated Quran into Japanese, and it's published by the Sakuhinsha publishing company. It's one of the biggest and oldest Japanese publishing company in Japan. So. And he has translated also, and another contribution of the Professor Hassan to the Japanese Muslim community, not only Japanese Muslim community, the Japanese audiences, that he translated the Japanese Islamic classic a lot. But not only his like a PhD or academic work, like this like a collection of Ibn Taymiyyah's, like with a bit Majmu' al-Mu'allafat, the Siyasa, the Shaykh Islam Ahmad Ibn Taymiyyah. I think this is a collection of the Ibn Taymiyyah's like treatise, especially focusing on the political philosophy. He also translated the Hanbali fiqh into Japanese. And I think this is the first Japanese books which introduced like a Islamic jurisprudence to the Japanese audiences. So in this sense, like he is one of like the pioneers of like Islamic Islamic studies in Japan. And another important work is this What is Sharia? This is also, I think, one of the first books in Japan which explain the philosophy of Sharia in a holistic manner. And since his main field is like Ibn Taymiyyah's like political philosophy, many of the people in Japan, like many of the Muslims in Japan think that he is like a radical Salafi, like scholar. That he has this aspect as well. Well, the reason why I said that, integrated scholar in the beginning of this his slide is that he also studied like a tasawwuf under the Turkish sheikh called the Sheikh Nazim. I think I remember Sheikh Nazim was quite active in UK as well. And he visited like Sheikh Nazim, I think 20 years ago, when he was living in his house in Cyprus. And he made intisab, and he joined his tariqah, and he gained a training with him. And he shared this photo with me. And I think he said that, this is when he traveled to, I think in America. In America, there was an international conference about tasawwuf, and he went to the conference with the Sheikh Nazim, and he was having like dinner with him. And he also invited like Sheikh Nazim to Japan as well, and he organized a conference there too. So that is so in this sense, like Professor Hassan is a relatively interesting figure compared to the other like a Japanese Muslim intellectual, because usually the Japanese Muslim, they only have one background. Like if they were educated in Saudis, they become like Saudi-oriented scholar. If they're educated in Syria, they become like Syrian-oriented scholar. But Professor Hassan, he studied in Cairo and studied like Ibn Taymiyyah philosophy, and he had many like Salafi like friends. But also in the same time, he gained like Naqshbandi like tasawwuf education with a Turkish sheikh. So, and not only he has also connection with the among the Muslim, he also quite famous in the Japanese academia in general. For example, he's Professor Uchida Tatsuru. He is one of the leading philosopher in Japan. He is a specialist in the French literature, and also himself is the like no theater artist, no theater. I don't know anyone who watch like a no theater play, but no is one of the oldest like theater play in the world, and especially and so he is not just a philosopher, but he is an artist. And Professor Hassan and Uchida made an interview with the Professor Uchida Tatsuru and to explain that what is the vision of Islam, and also like what is the problem of Japanese society. And they also discussed how the Islam bring a new perspective for the Japanese societies. And he also made an interview with other like leading Japanese philosophers as well. So I think thanks for him, like now this before him, like Islamic culture or like a Muslim sounds like exotic things. But I think thanks for Professor Hassan, now this Islamic discourse has started to root it in Japanese society. Like this is what I saw, in at least the last 10 years. And so the great thing about him is that he's not just talking to like the Japanese Muslim society, but he also talking to the Japanese society in general. And this one is one of his latest book. It's about 13歳からの世界征服. It means that how to conquer the world. And education introduction for the 13 years old like youngsters. But this here it means like conquer the world. It means like it doesn't mean like a conquer the world like a military. It means like how to control yourself and keep the balance living in this world. So this is this book is aimed for is targeted for like the teenager in Japan who feel like a social pressure or the stress for everyday life, and Professor Hassan tried to answer them according to the Islamic perspective. And this book was also quite big, become quite popular. I think it's become the bestseller in Amazon Japan. And I also read the books, but it's quite inspirational. And his wife is also left a tremendous contribution to the Japanese Muslim society. Her name is the Khawla Kaori Nakata, and so this is Sheikh Khawla, and she is her student. And she is considered as like a first Japanese anime in the history of Japan. And she established like a monthly like a Muslim newspaper. So I think in the 80s, or I think in the 80s. So before that, we don't have like a really strong media for the to connect all the Japanese Muslim. And she is the first one who tried to create that kind of like a social network, among the Japanese Muslim. And she have also translated like Tafsir Jalalain, which is funded by Saudi, Association for like Saudi Arabian, I think Saudi Arabian company. Yeah. And this is, I think, yes, as far as I remember, this Japanese translation of Tafsir al-Jalalain is the first Japanese tafsir, like translate tafsir in Japan. And she also like a Sira Nabawiya, and she also wrote lots of tasawwuf, and she also like tried to how do you say, encourage like a Japanese Japanese female Muslim to wear to practice Islam, for example, like wearing hijab or because before that, there are some Muslims who were really scared, and some of them were hiding their identity. But Professor Khala, she had been keep saying that the being Muslim is proud, and also practicing Islam like make us more perfect. And personally, I became Muslim thanks for her book. Like So this book is written by the Sheikh Hawda Kaori. It's called Yasashi Kami-sama no Ohanashi. And it was like a private book, printed book, but Professor Hassan negotiated one publisher. And I think 1 year ago, it has been, now it's available in all bookstore in Japan. And this Yasashi Kami-sama no Ohanashi means like introduction to how you say, introduction to the concept of Allah, or introduction to Allah. I read this book, before when I was a non-Muslim, or just ordinary Japanese Muslim. And before that, what I knew about Islam was completely influenced by the Western media, especially like Islamophobic, like Western media. So, me personally, I don't have like any good image about a Muslim, but this book really changed my life. I think changed my life because this book is actually a translation, Japanese translation of one Arab Islamic classic, especially Tasawwuf classic, written by Arabic language. But her explanation in Japanese was so beautiful. Like her balaga was so let's say refined and beautiful, and it directly entered my heart. And I became Muslim, after 1 year later. But I think the moment I read this book, I already made a decision to become Muslim. And I think this is the vision of the like Sheikha Kaori, that the importance of expressing like Islam in our like vernacular language. So she knows that that the Japanese language can express like the beauty of Islam beautiful way. And last, I think last Japanese scholar I want to introduce is the Mujahid Matsuyama Yohei, the Professor Mujahid Yohei, and he is also the student of the Professor Hassan and Professor Hawda Kaori. So there is like a strong silsila which come from the Professor Hassan, and he is now the leading Japanese Muslim intellectual who specialize in Ilm al-Qalam and also the fiqh. So Mujahid Matsuyama Yohei, he was born in 1984, and he got a PhD in Tokyo University in foreign studies, and I say especially in Kalam and fiqh, especially for Muslim minorities. So before Professor Mujahid like, we have Japanese Muslims have been focusing on just translating Islamic classic as much as possible. But I think since the Professor Mujahid, now the Japanese Muslim have started to understand the situation that we are living in, and thanks for his work, because he authored a lot of he authored lots of books about how to live in Japan as like Muslim minorities. So not just like being Muslim, but he tried to like teach us like, is there any way to keep our identity as a minority in a non-Muslim country? But he's not just like, the specialist on like like a Muslim minority, but he is I think he can be one of the like best scholars in the classical like Islamic theology. And he translated the Aqid al-Nasafiyya, and it was published in 2016. But this is not just a translation of the Aqid al-Nasafiyya. Like he made a commentary on the Aqid al-Nasafiyya, and that commentary, the Sharh is more than like 500 pages. So this book, actually I have this book. Like if you can see my camera, you can see how thick this book is. So this Japanese Muslim, they all wrote a commentary of the Aqid al-Nasafiyya with more than 500 pages. And in this sense, many people think that that there is no like Islamic scholarship in Japan, or there is no like Islamic tradition in Japan, or no other culture. But I think the existence of the Professor Mujahid is enough. Like there is like a Japanese Muslim who can author a commentary of the Aqid al-Nasafiyya. And look at the other like a Muslim like situation in the non-Muslim country. I don't think there are so many like intellectuals who can author the commentary of Aqid al-Nasafiyya with more than 500 pages. So in this sense, like a brother Mujahid is like our pride. And other thing is like as the Professor Hassan is doing, like he is also quite active in not only like a Muslim Japanese Muslim community, but also like among the non-Muslim Japanese like society. So he is writing like some number of essays in the website called Webgendon. Webgendon is one of the most popular website, the portal website, where the leading Japanese philosopher write their own like essays, or like essays or column in it, and his essay is more focusing on like the Islamic history in Japan, and also like Islamic discourses in Japan. For example, I have translated one of his essays into Turkish. That title is Allah no hoka hotoke nashi. It means like there is no hotoke, like Buddha, other than Allah. But here, in this essay, he discussed the history of the translation of the Islamic concept in the Japanese, and he criticized, the situation of a Japanese Muslim, that we haven't considered enoughly about the importance of the translation of the Islamic concept. It means like like sometimes we are too naive about like understanding Islamic concept and the importance of the Islamic concept. But the Japanese society has its own context, and also the Islamic civilization has its own history and the context. So the brother Mujahid is what brother Mujahid is encouraging us is that we as a Japanese Muslim, or Japanese Muslim who living as a minority in Japan, we must understand both like Islamic scholarship and also like Japanese culture. And only studying about the Islamic science is not enough. And also only knowing about the Japanese culture will never make us a Muslim. So what he is emphasizing is that we must be the mastery of the two civilizations, like Islamic civilization and also the Japanese culture. And this work is that I was also the member of this translation project. This is a Japanese translation of the Yusuf Qaradawi's the fiqh for Muslim minorities. Fiqh did but Yusuf Qaradawi just passed away a few weeks ago, rahimahullah. And the Mujahid Yohe, he also wrote the Aqidah and Fiqh for Muslim minorities. So if you can read the Japanese, like he made a really interesting like argument about the how the Japanese Muslim like keep the identity, or even they develop the identity in Japan. So the reason why I introduced the Japanese Muslim scholars today is that to show that actually, I think the first phase, like identification, is now accomplished, and now we are in the phase of translation. Like this translation, it means that there are some like Japanese scholars who are educated in Middle Eastern countries or the South Asia or Indonesia and Malaysia, and now they are trying to like importing those like Islamic knowledges to Japan, and but furthermore, like Professor Nakata Sensei or the Nakata Kaori Sensei or the Mujahid Sensei, they are some like the amazing like Japanese scholar who are even in the stage of articulation. Here, articulation is like they not only just they are well versed, well informed in Islamic civilization or Islamic knowledges. Now they are trying to convey this message in the vernacular language, like Japanese language, right, according to like Japanese context. So here. So in this sense, like I am quite optimistic about the future of the Japanese Muslim society because for example, like Sheikh Ahmad Maina, he is investing on the young generation, and Brother Mujahid, like not only translate Islamic classes, but he made lots of like inquiries which is useful for both Japanese Muslim and also non-Muslim Japanese. And but I think if there is any problem in Japanese society, I think we are lack of the female scholars, because the Nakata Kaori Sensei, like he was an amazing scholar, but unfortunately like she passed away like 14 years ago. And we don't, and after the Kaori Sensei, like we don't have any that influential like female Japanese Muslim scholar. So I think this is going to be like challenging for Japanese Muslim to invest on education for Japanese Muslim, Japanese female Muslim, so that some of them can become like like Japanese anima and contribute for Japanese society. And in the end, I also want to introduce my works as well. For example, I am also like a translator to introduce like Islamic culture to the Japanese audiences. One of my translation is the Futuwa, and this book was written by the Abu Abdul Rahman Sulami, and this is considered the first Islamic books which talk about the concept of Futuwa. Futuwa is in English usually it translates as Islamic chivalry, like Islamic like young. Futuwa itself means like youngness or the manliness. It's like like Islamic ethics, especially cherished by the like the youth. And the reason why I have translated this book is that usually Muslim preachers or like who try to make dawah, they always try to talk about like the philosophical or metaphysical like concept, like what is Allah, like what is the meaning of creator, and what is the meaning of prophecy. And of course it's essential because like this creed will make us Muslim, but in the same time it's really important to find like similarity between like Japanese culture and also Islamic culture. And I found that this Futuwa, the concept of Futuwa, it really resembles our concept of the Bushido, the philosophy of the samurai. And as I said, when I was a child, I was really influenced by the Japanese Christian Nitobe Inazo's like a book of Bushido, introduction to Bushido, philosophy of samurai. And I was hoping that one day, so I was hoping that that one day if the Japanese readers might read Futuwa, they might also get influenced the same way, because this Futuwa is focusing on the Islamic akhlaq, especially about spiritual altruism, in Arabic called Isar. And this is what missing in the Japanese society, because now the Japanese society is so capitalized and so atomized society, and everybody is so busy. So they only taking care of themselves, and they don't have like a vision of helping others for the sake of the divine. But in this Futu, and I found this Futua is one of the most beautiful book which articulate the concept of this altruism. So I hope this book will help the Japanese readers to understand this concept. But by the way, like when this book got published, I was checking the Amazon Japan for every day, and just 1 week, but it became like a bestseller among the Islamic section in Amazon Japan. So at the time I was very happy. And another project I was doing that I did is the introduction to Tasawwuf, and with the comparison with the shonen manga. And I don't know, some of you might watch the Japanese animation manga, but Japanese animation manga is also not just the entertainment. Actually, this is how the Japanese are trying to keep their traditional values, like importance of mastership or discipleship, and also importance of like tauba, repentance, and importance of spiritually like being born again. And so I extracted the kind of like narrative from the shonen manga and try to introduce like like a Sufi like a culture in Islamic civilization. And alhamdulillah, and this project also got a good reaction from the Japanese readers. And now I'm in the final editing of this book, and inshallah it will be published in the end of this year, or the beginning of the next year. And so today, I briefly like introduce about the Japanese Muslim intellectual in 21st century. And the next week, I want to talk about is it possible for us to create like a Japanese Islamic culture? Because personally, I believe that the culture has a huge impact. When we look about in the history of Islamization in Indonesia, Malaysia, or the China, like in almost every region, culture has like a power to convey like Islamic vision to like non-Muslim like citizens. And actually, I already have the answer. I think it is possible to create a Japanese Islamic culture, and it's already like a Japanese Islamic culture. And one of the good example is Sheikh Fuad Honda. He is the Japanese Muslim calligrapher who got his art education in Saudi and the Middle East, and also Turkey as well. And he trying to use like a Japanese artistic, so Japanese aesthetic, and to try to combine like Islamic like a calligraphy art. And he's also very known. And there are some like Japanese Muslim like artists as well. But next week I will try to introduce what kind of concept or philosophy in Japanese aesthetic can be useful for us to articulate the Islamic Islamic ideal for like Japanese audiences. So thank you very much. This is all my presentation for today.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Naoki, for the presentation and the lecture. The next part is Q&A. We hope our audience has taken notes and is prepared for the question and comment section. So the floor is to the audience. Please raise your hands in the chat in the section WhatsApp, so that we know who has the question to ask. And also there are a few questions in the chat already, Naoki, if you had noticed, but I'll mention those to you as well. Let me start. Okay, it looks like Kasim has a question. Kasim, unmute yourself, please, and ask the question. Yep, can't hear you. Could you speak a bit loudly, please?
I'm sorry. I in fact didn't meant to have a questions, and I just want to have a comment.
Sure. go
And
ahead.
I appreciated Ustaz's talk and very much, and it is very informative from the historical formation of and the categorizations of those the scholars that they are leading these the Islamization in Japanese context. But since you have, I was thinking to send my congratulations to him. But since you asked me question, and let me ask that from the point of from the point of the intellectual activities in Japan, is it all tied to the universities, or is there a halakha type of the traditionally rooted Islamic educational circles in Japan? Of course, they are valid both. I'm not questioning about the university environment. I'm just asking from the point of the where the for example, in other parts of the world where the Muslim minorities are, there have been established some madrasas, some of those institutions like where the traditional Islamic sciences being studied. Is there a similar things in Japan also? That was I would ask this question if there's something.
Thank you very much. Çok teşekkür ederim hocam. Thank you
My
very much
pleasure.
for the question. Actually, it's a really a good question. Unfortunately, we don't have from Hadaka culture in Japan yet. So that is actually the main reason that most of these Japanese Muslim scholars got education outside of Japan. Because we have some Halakha-ish culture and some of the masajid in Japan, or the Islamic Institute, which is run by the Saudis or Iran or the Turkish government. But this is really like introductory classes, like introduction to Quran, or basic tajweed lessons, or like how to pray salat, or like how to pay zakat, and that kind of thing. So, but I mean, it's quite also useful and valuable for Japanese Muslim, but there is some limitations. But if someone wants to seek more ilm, more than that, then there is no other choice than than seeking like educational like environment outside of Japan. And another challenging thing is that in the past we have so many options. Like there are some Japanese Muslims who had education in Syria and also Egypt or the Iraq. We also have the Muslim who got education in Iraq, but because of this current chaotic situation in the Middle East, we have less options now. And in my case, I also see many Japanese Muslim converts who became Muslim in Japan. But the problem is that I think more than 90% of the Japanese Muslim converts leaves Islam within 2 or 3 years. And there is a reason. The primary reason is that the lack of strong Muslim community in Japan, and the second is I think lack of opportunity to get education. So so when I found, or when I encountered a Japanese Muslim, and with the potential, I always try to encourage them to study outside of Japan. And in my case, I'm living in Turkey, so I'm encouraging them to come to Istanbul to get some education. Because Istanbul is not only for like traditional Islamic education, because they are like a big Muslim community, and sincere Muslim community here, and there are some good university. So, but I think if we want to establish a strong Japanese Muslim intellectual community, I think in the near future, we should establish like we should create like halakha culture, or maybe like Islamic college, or like Islamic or an education, or to develop like Islamic education in Japan as well. Without this, it's really difficult to keep I think Muslim identity in Japan. But in order to do this, first of all, we need to produce like a Japanese Muslim intellectual enoughly, because right now we have some like a great Muslim, great Japanese Muslim, but they're just the in maximum just like 10 or at least like 5 people. It's not enough. And also we are also lack of female Japanese anima as well. Like for the female education, we need a female anima. So in this sense, actually we have lots of challenges, unfortunately. But inshallah, may Allah help us.
Thank you, Naoki. We have another question. So Salah is there. He raised his hand. But before going to that, there's a similar question in the chat. I mean, MC, he asked whether the non-Japanese non-Muslims are accessing most of the Islamic content via online or directly from the community. Mostly, I guess they mostly access Islamic materials from online, right? Is it correct? Or?
Yeah, it's from online. And not only from online, but there is one Japanese academician, which is quite Islamophobic actually, who's spreading like a wrong image about Islam, and her works are actually quite like a bestseller in the Japanese market, and it's also quite challenging for us because it's easy to spreading the wrong information, but it's really difficult to correct the wrong information. Like speaking the wrong information is so easy. You just speak it out, but the correcting wrong information that we need to show like the strong evidence to prove that that information is wrong. So, and I'm a little bit afraid of it. So in this sense, I'm really afraid that that we need to be more active, not only among the Muslim community, but also like in the non-Muslim like Japanese like audiences. Like in this sense, we must not hide from us. But we need to get we try to get exposed as much as possible. But of course, like as long as we are educated enough, like that. Otherwise, I think in the near future, because even right now, there is kind of like studies that the ordinary Japanese youth are becoming more right wing, and sometimes they're racist. But if they cannot like guide ourselves to the correct path, we might face like an ugly situation, which the other Muslim community are facing right now in the other countries. So that's why education is quite crucial. Right?
Okay. There was a hand raised in the chat. Please feel free to raise your hand again. We will try to accommodate as many questions as possible. So Mac asked an interesting questions. I mean, it's about Islam's how Islam is historically framed in Japan. I mean, the context. For example, he said, in the West, Islam is most understood through Orientalism, right? How they depicted a picture, romanticized it, and that's how the West looks at Islam from the Orientalist point of view. So how Islam is understood in Islam is understood in Japan initially? I
think historically, we don't very much have like a bad image like in Islam, and not a good image either. It means like Muslims are so alien to us. That's why like we cannot even imagine what kind of people they are. So and the first encounter with a Muslim during the Meiji period, by that time, those as I said, the Japanese Empire supported those Muslim for their like political interests. So there some of the inter-ASEAnists, they are present but Muslim, but I don't know they meant, I don't know they mean it or not. But I think the image about the image toward the Muslim or the Islam got worse, especially since the the 9/11, I think, because this war. 9/11. Because even after the Iranian Revolution or Iraqi war, like the Japanese didn't have much of a bad image about Muslim, but 9/11 had a huge impact on the Japanese Muslim. But still, the Japanese have like relatively good image to the Muslim, I think. But we must not forget that the problem with the Japanese have a negative image on the religion in general, especially like so-called religious people, because during the 80s and 90s, there are some like Buddhist, radical Buddhist cult were quite active in Japan, and they killed, they assassinated some of the they are intellectual who are against this Buddhist cult, and they even made like a terror attack and want to meet for in Tokyo, and that is still a trauma for the the Japanese citizen. And as maybe some of them know, but a few months ago, ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also got killed by the young man, and it is and reports said that his family were the member of the one radical Christian cult from their Korea, and since that is incidents, the Japanese media also start talking about the danger of the region, especially about the cult. So in general, Japanese don't have the specific bad image of the Muslim, but they have a bad image of the region in general. So and especially like so-called religious people. Religious mean the people who are practicing a certain religion in the public sphere. So so I think the difficult thing is that part, like. So how can I say, like Japanese are quite friendly if you don't show your religiosity in the public, but if they found out that you are practicing something in religious life, they suddenly make you treat as like an alien. So this is kind of like a difficult thing about Japanese psychology, I think.
Okay, thank you. We have a few more questions to take. Salah, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for the really interesting talk. I had two brief questions, if that's okay. The first is jumping off of your last point. Does that apply in terms of kind of the fear or thinking you're kind of an alien or weird if you practice religion publicly? Does that also apply to practicing Shinto?
In Japan, yes. So if you publicly said that you are like a religious Shintoist, then many Japanese think that you are like a scary guy from like the talking about religion itself in the public is also already controversial, and talking that you are practicing some religion in the public makes you more alien. Like not only Islam, but Shinto and Buddhism and Taoism, like religion in general.
Okay, thanks. And the second question I had was, in terms of creating, this goes back to the first question asked, creating kind of like a halakha culture or those kinds of grassroots institutions. Mm-hmm. Has there been any thought about like the historical institutions that existed, such as I think they're called terakoya, that existed historically in Japan, not so much today, but kind of, I guess, resurrecting such things?
Oh, you mean outside of Muslim community? You mean our like traditional terakoya?
Yeah, traditional terakoya, both in terms of like not the Muslim Japanese community, so generally in Japan, but also for like having an Islamic terakoya, if you will.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if we can establish like Islamic terakoya, it's gonna be wonderful. Actually, this is one of the best memory that I came to Muslim communities, that it makes me so surprised to see that there is still a living terakoya in the Muslim countries. Like I visited Lahore, and I visited like Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and Indonesia. Indonesia they call like pesantren, in Malaysia they call pondok. And in Turkey too, there are so many like grassroots like educational institute there. And in Japan, we have I think we don't have the kind of educational environment anymore. Like not even Buddhist, like in Buddhist or the Shinto side. Like we don't pay much attention. We don't invest on education that much. But in the Muslim community, the ilm still matters. And I think this is one of the values that the Muslim can introduce like Japanese again. Like to remember that that Japan also had like similar tradition. But because of modernization, and also because of Westernization after the Second World War, we started to completely forget our own heritage, and even the clothes as well. Like we are wearing Western clothes instead of a traditional Japanese clothes. But I believe is that I think I wanted to talk about this topic in the next year. But if we can create if there is a possibility that if they can create a Japanese Islamic culture, I think this is the point that we can revive our Japanese tradition, and with the spirituality of Islam.
Okay, I think, thank you so much for your question. Right, next, I think Moti Rahman, you had raised your hand before. Could you please unmute yourself and make your question? Moti Rahman?
I have Salamu Alaikum. Hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Lovely. It's been so insightful me to see sort of how a country becomes Islamicate over time. So I'm just thinking, going back to my root is Bangladesh. So I'm just picturing now how it sort of evolved into sort of a Islamic community. And your 3 points is very nice: identification, translation, and also articulation. How you've said that. That was so very interesting. I'm just also, the other observation is of the 4 madhabs, the 2 strictest madhabs, the Hanbali and Shafi, seems to be very popular, while Hanafi and Maliki, in my opinion, would be a bit more relaxed and sort of more adaptable. So that's a very interesting observation for me to see that in Japan, you are sort of more adopting the later two, the other 2, Hanbali and Shafi madhabs. Very interesting as well is this patronage also, that where the scholars are trained, the ideology also follows from there. So rather than having a Japanese local cultural sort of Islamic ideology, you have this coming in Salafi or sort of a Iranian or Turkish. That's something interesting. Just while you were giving the lecture, I had something in my memory. I think it's a tradition. My Arabic is not very good, but I'm going to say it in Arabic. Ash-shaykhu fi qawmihi kan nabi fil ummatihi. So the translation is, as I understand, the sheikh among his community is like a prophet among his nation. So my understanding in other parts of Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, you had the masters, the sheikhs or the Sufis having their sort of location, sitting down there, and the people benefiting from that. So each location has its own organic evolvement of a society. I'm just wondering, do you have any sheikhs there? And you've just explained that in your society, it's very difficult to publicly say you belong to a religion because of after the Second World War, secularism has taken over so much. And also, before I forget, I was fascinated by a scholar called Izutsu. Izutsu, I don't know whether he converted to Islam or not, but he was fascinating in his sort of Arabic grammar analysis of the Quran. Do you know anything about him? I was actually taken back by his work. It was in English work by Izutsu. I can't say his other name. Thank you. Excellent, excellent. Just to say how countries evolve into an Islamic tradition.
No, thank you very much for your comment and question. On the second one, yeah, about Izutsu, I want to start from the second question about Izutsu Toshihiko. Yes, he is one of the most famous academicians of Islamic philosophy and tasawwuf. But today I didn't introduce him because I wanted to focus on the Japanese Muslim interaction, because Izutsu Toshihiko, he was not a Muslim. I mean, I met one of his students, and he said that Izutsu Toshihiko was once a Muslim when he was really young, like 20s. But after that, it seemed that he left like Islam, or I don't know, like Allah Alam. But he actually, he was an interesting figure because he also had connection with Abdul Rashid Ibrahim. He's one major Tatar scholar who lived in the Ottoman Empire, and also he also met Musa Janunda. He was also like famous. I think he was also Tatar scholar. But the difficult, complicated thing about him is that he also worked with the Manchurian company as the Institute of Islamic Study of the Manchurian Company. And this Manchurian Railroad Company is a Japanese version of the East Indian Company. So he also worked as the kind of like agent of this Manchurian company, and he traveled to like South Malaysia, and he collected some information. So he was kind of like somewhere between those Japanese spy, between like a Japanese Muslim intellectual. So like we can learn a lot from his books, but when it comes to like the Japanese like Islamic intellectual tradition or Japanese Islamic culture, it's really difficult to evaluate his contribution to our Muslim community. I mean, yet he is really famous, like even not only in Japan but outside Japan, like globally. And the second one about the Sheikh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's gonna be the answer to your comment, but the one thing I really respect my sensei, the Hassan Nagata sensei, is that he knows this importance of being sensei or the being the sheikh, because the other Japanese Muslim too, they are really informed about Islamic studies, and they got really good education, and they also contribute to Muslim Japanese society, but they don't have this kind of strong like a mastership. But Nakata sensei, since he got education from the Sheikh Nazem, like he know how to guide especially young people, young generation, because there are so many like non-Muslim Japanese like youth are surrounding like the Hassan sensei, and he's seeking his help, and he's always trying to show love towards his youth, because once he said that he was taught by the Sheikh Nazim that Allah grace is like a mercy ocean, the mercy ocean. And Professor Hassan is one of the few Japanese Muslim who is practicing this rahmah to the Japanese Muslim, the Japanese who are facing lots of difficulties and challenges in the society, and many of them are actually converting Islam. And also another good thing about him is that he never pushed them to become Muslim. Like he knows the pacing, he knows that this process. And this is why I said in this presentation as well, not only individual, but even as the Muslim community as well, there is a process. There is an early stage of identification, and there's also like a stage of translation and articulation. And individual is also the same. Once they have to like digest the experiences, and they have to wait how this experience like flow into their own body and their spirits. And it says like not only Hassan sensei, but other students of Hassan sensei know this beauty of the processes that including me. Like I was not like one of the best students of him, but he always showed me like a patience on the rahmah. So in this sense, like if that's why just to conveying the Islamic message is not enough. What we need is like a tangible like experiences of the Islamic education. So in order to achieve this, like we need like this halakha environment, and also we need like a tangible shape or the teachers, and we need like a culture we call like sohbet. In Turkey they call sohbet, sohbet etmek, and I think this is what we need in the near future. Yeah.
Jazakallah, lovely.
Okay, thank you.
I've learned a lot.
Nuwan Siddiqui, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Naeem. My question is maybe it's about the Muslim community there is, as you said earlier, is mostly the immigrants, right?
Yes.
So was there a intrinsic need of having Islamic knowledge or Islamic institution there, or is it more the influence of the Islamic missionary, as you could see, as you said earlier about the influence of the Iran and the Saudis and the Malaysians? So how do you see the extrinsic and the intrinsic modes of inculcating Islamic knowledge in the Japanese context? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand the question.
Okay, so the question is about, you see, either the society has an intrinsic need of having they don't have much it's a second and third generation. They don't have much knowledge about the Islam and the Islamic concepts and the context. So there's intrinsic need to get the education or the knowledge about the Islam. And then, as you said, there is a different, the school of thoughts of some comes from the Saudi side and some from the Irani side. So on the Indonesian or Malaysian side. So it seems that there is a kind of a extrinsic forces as well that works in the in the Japanese context as compared to the intrinsic need or intrinsic evolution of Islamic culture. So
I see. This is I'm not sure it gonna be the answer to it, but today I talk about some of the intellectuals who got education in like Saudi or Iran or the other countries. But when it comes to the conversion, I think the contribution of Muslim immigrants from the South Asia and South Asia are more huge. For example, like there was a big earthquake, I think that more than 15 years ago, I think, and in the northern part of Japan. And at the time, there was the masjid called Otsuka Masjid in Tokyo. And I think it's run by, I think Jamaat Islami or Tablighi Jamaat. I think that's someone from the South Asia. And they went to the city and they supported like a lot of Japanese like who suffered, with this earthquake and tsunami. And this is and the many newspaper wrote their contribution about to the Japanese community after this incident, and when I see some of the converts in Tokyo Jami or the other masjid, many youngsters, especially young generation, said that they got influenced by this kind of humanitarian activities, which is done by the Muslim foreigners who are working in the Japanese masjid. So, but the thing is, when it comes to education, unfortunately, since we don't have much like Islamic scholar, like both from foreign countries or in Japan, they kind of limit. So, and for the second generation, third generation, like as long as what I heard from them is that most of them they don't even know the importance of like having like Islamic education. So, and some of them like they are losing like identity. So what I want to say is that there are many like good Muslims living in Japan, and they always also work, and many people influence it. But once they become Muslim, or once they're born Muslim, they don't have enough good environment to keep their identity. And I think that's gonna be like in the next challenges. And what is worse is that many people they don't know about the challenges of what they're facing.
Okay, so we have a few more questions, but time is a bit over at the moment. So let me take one or two more questions, then probably we will end the session tonight. So the one has many questions. Right, we still have people are joining. All right, so there are a few questions, mostly about the availability of Islamic contents and materials accessible and their accessibility. As you said already, that most of the contents are accessed through online, because I'm not so sure how much availability of the physical material in there. Also, one question is related with that from myself is that according to a article from The Economist published in 2021 last year, it said that the number of Muslims are increasing in Japan, and it is increasing fast. Do you think there are enough resources available for them to cater their needs? I mean, in terms of written materials, in terms of resources such as mosques or community centers, circles, to accommodate their needs.
For this Japanese Muslim.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I think about the materials, as I said, I think we already have enough materials, like because we have more than 100 like copies of introductory books about Islam. And Brother Mujahid also translated like, the classical books about Kalam and also fiqh. And we also translate like, Yusuf Qaradawi's books, Fiqh Minorities. So I think the problem is that we have books, but we don't have the people who embodies these ideals, like including me. Like, this is also my problem as well. Like, I mean, my case is worse because I'm living in Turkey. I'm not living in Japan. So, but I mean, and in Japan, I mean, not maybe only for Japan, but this is a human nature. But but written text is not persuasive enough. Like, what they want to see is the person, the human being who can practice and show this like Islamic vision, and also like apply this Islamic vision to their own society. And if we see like Japanese Christian or even the Japanese communist, what did they say? They practice. They practice their vision and try to apply to society. And that's why I said that, I respect some of the Japanese foreign Muslim, from Pakistani Muslim or Bangladeshi Muslim or Indonesian Muslim in Otsuka Masjid, because they helped the Japanese who suffered this tsunami and earthquake, with the practice. And what we need is the kind of people who can show the who can embody the the rahmah which is taught in the Quran, or who can practice the sohbah which is practiced by the Prophet and Sahaba. And this is also important about the conveying Islamic message or preaching Islamic message to the Japanese audiences as well. Because I remember, I think someone said that it was a word of Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, that he advised the people that avoid words as much as possible when it comes to the dawah. Because like, the more you talk, sometimes more it becomes like superficial. But sometimes, what Japanese want to see is just one tangible love, or the rahmah, because the Japanese society is so stressful, and that every year more than 20,000 people are committing suicide in Japan, because they don't have any help, and they don't have any like interaction, the humane interaction in the society. So this might be a little off topic. So this is why accessibility to knowledge is quite already enough. So I think what they need is accessibility to the the rahmah of the Muslim community.
Okay, right. I think that we had a few more questions from Masum actually. I think Masum, if you could attend future lectures, then definitely Naoki would be able to address those as well. So tonight we already passed our allocated time, so we can't take any more questions, unfortunately. Our next lecture is on next week, Saturday, 22nd October, on the topic, is it possible to create an Islamic culture in Japan? Courtesy, purity, and simplicity. It will be held at the same time. So, so again, we thank Dr. Naoki for the lecture, and to you all for taking part and making valuable comments and questions. We are very much looking forward to seeing you in our next lecture. With that, we're closing our session tonight. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khairan.